Apple isn't the only company that can create lots of buzz around a smartphone launch anymore. Good morning. Welcome to the News Hub. I'm Rolf Winkler. Yesterday, Samsung's long-awaited Galaxy smartphone, the S4, made its debut to a packed house at Radio City Music Hall in New York. How much pressure will the device put on Apple? Neil Mawston, an analyst with research firm Strategy Analytics, was at Samsung's event last night and joins us now to break it down. Neil, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, Rolf.
I was there too. It was quite a spectacle.
It was. It was a big event. Lots of razzmatazz. Very good.
They have, I think Radio City, I looked it up on Google, they have a capacity of 6,000. I don't know, there definitely were a few, I want to say a couple more thousand outside in line trying to get in.
Yeah, it was a big event. Lots of people inside, lots of people outside, lots of people in Times Square as well. It was,
That's right. They put it on the big screen in Times Square. That's true. So now let's get to it. Just setting the stage for people here. Samsung, we think about Apple as the dominant smartphone player with the iPhone, but Samsung actually has much more market share in smartphones, correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So on a global basis, Samsung's market share of the smartphone market is around about 30%. Apple's is only around about 20% by volume, so there is quite a big gap between the two, and we expect Samsung to expand that lead this year because they play in multiple tiers across multiple regions. Lots of coverage, and that should enable them to stay ahead of Apple this year.
And that's a good point, because is it fair to compare the two? I want to get to the phone in a second, but let's clear this up for people. Market shares, they play at the lower end as well. When it comes to high-end, ultra-high-end devices, the ones that are really expensive, $600 without a subsidy, how do those market shares compare?
Yeah, that's a good point, Rolf. So Samsung plays in the high tier, the mid tier, and the low tier, whereas Apple only tends to play in the higher tiers. If you compare just the higher tiers only, we estimate Apple has around about half the market globally, and Samsung has around about 40% of the market globally. So a little bit of a different picture.
Okay, but let's talk about the device. How impressed were you with the S4 itself? I know you got to play with it a couple days ago.
Yeah, so we've had a trial on it, held it in our hands and so forth, heard a little bit about the strategy behind it. We're pretty impressed. We think it's a nice device. It looks attractive, lots of good software features on there. Lots of good services on top that make it feel nice and usable. We think it's a good device. In terms of pricing, we think it'll come in a little bit below the iPhone type prices, so it'll be fairly competitive on prices. And I think Samsung has a reasonably good phone on its hands.
For US users, though, this is probably still going to be $200 with a subsidy, like an iPhone?
Right, exactly. So US operators like Verizon Wireless will probably subsidize the S4 to lower price points. They'll tend to buy it for around about $550 wholesale trade price, we estimate, and then they'll subsidize it down to around about $100, $200, $300 retail to the consumer.
Okay, and just as a note for our viewers, on our website you can see some of the features of the new S4 and how it compares to the iPhone 5, to BlackBerry's new Z10, so be sure to check that out. But Neil, let's maybe dig in a little bit more on specific features that you thought that were maybe the most impressive or maybe the most disappointing. Pick out a few things that really stand out for you.
Yeah, I think the form factor looks fairly attractive. So they've packed a big 5-inch screen in a relatively hand-friendly, user-friendly device. I think recognition is also a key word I'd use here. So there is hand recognition, eye recognition, voice recognition, gesture recognition. There's lots of kind of recognizing what the human does, looking at different parts of the body, and you can use that to control the phone. That's a nice theme, not just using your finger, but also using your hands, your eyes, your mouth. That's a nice play by Samsung.
I mean, how are features like that going to be actually useful for people? So one of them, they talk about this air gesture. So instead of actually touching the screen on the phone to say move from one web page to another, you can actually move your hand over it. And that's kind of interesting in theory. How will it have practical application?
I think it gives the consumer more choice. So you get different segments who want different things. Some people, for example, might prefer to use 2 fingers, or they may prefer to use 1 finger. Or you could even have a touchless screen, so you don't even have to touch it. You can swipe your hand across it, so you can move from one web page to another, or you can scroll up and down from a web page or move videos. And it's kind of it's maybe a little bit gimmicky, but it's still a different way of activating your device, and I think that will excite some consumers.
And maybe, you know, for people, if you're eating fries, your hands are greasy or something, you don't want to touch your touch screen, mess it up, maybe that would be one reason why you might want to swipe just over the air on top of the device without actually touching it.
Exactly, that's a great example. If you're at McDonald's and you're eating some food and your hands may be a little bit sticky or something, you can swipe across the device and not ruin the screen.
Okay, but a lot of other features. Last question, what can we expect out of Apple this year?
I think Apple now has to come back with a good response on this. They're really under pressure now to fight back with a device that compares well with the Samsung S4. We expect that around the middle of the summer they will come out with 1, possibly 2 new models, and they'll need to respond with a device that has a big screen, good software and a good suite of services on top that can really compete well with the S4.
Okay, Neil, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rolf.